So Dr. Rossett found the funding for me to become the first sickle cell nurse working with her. That's how it all happened.
Amazing.
And I found my father. I then find out I have a cousin with sickle cell anemia. Well, that brings it home to you, doesn't it, in the family?
It certainly does.
And then political. Wow, I was a political animal in the 70s. Come on.
You were...
I'm Suzette Llewellyn.
I'm Suzanne Packer.
We're two actors and, more importantly, two friends who've been through life's ups and downs together over the last 30 years.
In this series, we invite some incredible people to our imaginary veranda to tell the stories of their lives.
This is Veranda Talk. Dame Elizabeth Anionwu, thank you for joining us here at Red Bull London, and welcome to Veranda Talk.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here with you both.
Oh, we're delighted to have you here. Now, I've got to give you your very full title, which is Professor Dame Elizabeth Anionwu. And bizarrely, you are a retired nurse, but you're probably the busiest retiree I think I know. So I'm just gonna give you all your accolades. I might have to take a very, very big breath because there's a lot of them. You are an author, you're a lecturer, you are the patron of several charities. You, with much acclaim, were presented with the Pride of Britain Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019. You are a fellow of the Royal College of Nursing, awarded for developing the sickle cell thalassemia counselling centre. And you are, in fact, the first sickle cell and thalassemia specialist nurse in the UK. You were appointed Dame of the British Empire, having previously been awarded a CBE for services to nursing and the Mary Seacole Statue Appeal. You are inducted into the Nursing Hall of Fame. You've achieved a Lifetime Achievement Award by Divas of Colour. You have an honorary degree from University of St Andrews, from Birmingham City University. You are on the list of the BBC's 100 Women last year, 100 Black women, and you have been a guest interviewee, which I can't wait to find out more about, on Desert Island Disc, which is an ambition of mine, cannot lie. And you took part most recently in King Charles's coronation. Now, Dame Elizabeth, of all of those accolades and awards and recognition, which gives you the most pleasure?
It isn't actually in my career, it's actually becoming a mother, considering what my early life was like. I never thought that not only would I have a daughter, but I have a granddaughter, and the support and pleasure that gives me. And that has sustained me through all the ups and downs of, that it has been a glittering career. Yes, I appreciate that. But as we all know, there are many issues in between, and to have that family support has been wonderful, and is still wonderful.
Tell us about your daughter, who Suze and I know,
yes.
Azuka Oforka.
Yes. Well, I'm incredibly proud of her, as you well know, Suzanne.
I do.
I think you can explain it more than me. That her debut play, The Women of Clanrumney, has really taken off, hasn't it?
Mm.
And I always used to see her scribbling as a child, but I thought all children scribbled. She always wanted to be an actress, and she did that for quite a few years. I hadn't realised that she had this absolute love of history as well as this writing talent. It just shows that we don't know as much about our children as we think we do. But, what a pleasant surprise. And I am so proud of her. So, so proud of her. Yes.
Award-winning.
Award-winning.
Her first
exactly.
play.
Yes.
She won the debut Writers' Award, stage
wasn't it? Yes.
debut award.
Yes.
And speaking of childhoods, I mean, the childhood you gave your daughter was obviously informed by your own understanding of childhood and your upbringing. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yes, certainly. So I like to say I'm the outcome of an affair that my parents had when they were both students at Cambridge University just after the Second World War. And my mother, my parents are both deceased now, but my mother was of Irish heritage, but born in Liverpool, but grew up in Stafford in the Midlands with her family, and was the first, like many of that generation probably, first in her family from that background to go to university. But she got a scholarship to Newnham College, Cambridge, to study classics. And it was in her second year of studies that she met my father, who was completing his law degree, again at Cambridge University. And he had been sponsored from Nigeria. But they never married. I grew up with my mother's maiden name, which is an Irish surname. And nobody ever spoke about my father. But for the first 9 years of my life, I grew up in a children's home. Now, my mother never wanted to have me adopted, and she was very stubborn with this, and in fact dropped out of university because she could have gone back. The door was open, although the university wasn't informed of why. They were told that she'd had a nervous breakdown and was recuperating in Ireland. Now, interestingly enough, when I learnt that, I thought, well, how interesting. My maternal grandparents were devout Catholics, devout. And I grew up in a Catholic children's home. And, you were taught you shouldn't lie, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And I thought, well, obviously there's times when you can lie, even if you're a Catholic, because obviously the stigma of the fact that my mother wasn't married, but also my mother didn't tell them anything about my father. And they'd assumed he was a white English, probably middle-class guy that she'd met at Cambridge University. So when I was born, my maternal grandparents came to see me and my mother in a maternity unit run by Irish nuns. So this Irish cultural thing was quite strong for me from birth, really. The nun sort of stopped my grandparents initially from coming into the unit because she wanted to really warn them. To be sure, the baby's a little dark. I had an afro when I was born. So there was no question about, excuse me, what's going on here?
There was no getting away from it.
No, so I sort of came into the world and shocked a few people, from the outset. But, my autobiography is called Dreams from My Mother. And that title comes from really the original dreams of my mother was to be an academic. No question about that. But she, gave that up in her efforts to provide a home for me. And I have fulfilled her dream, as well as, fortunately, also have a family. Not be married either, but look at the difference in today's world, where with difficulty, perhaps, but you can combine all that. So yes, that was my heritage. So I lived in a children's home until I was 9. My mother was a constant visitor. I never, ever had any sense of rejection from my mother. And that certainly psychologically, I can now look back and realise how that helped me sort of go forth into the world, if you like. But she took me out of the children's home when I was 9, and I went to live with her and my English stepfather. Initially, it was fine. We lived in Wolverhampton. But after a few months, when my mother wasn't around, his attitude towards me changed. So much so that he started to physically abuse me. And then I learnt much, much later on, he did like a drink. He wasn't alcoholic, but he did like his drinks. And apparently his workmates used to tease him, what are you doing allowing your woman to have a half-caste child in the house? And he couldn't cope with that. So, of course, who did he take it out on? Not my mother, because my mother was quite strong and, there was no question of him being allowed to physically abuse her. He took it out on me when my mother wasn't around. And I never told my mother until one day there was, I was bleeding. I mean, there was no question of it. She found out. And then my maternal grandparents rescued me because my mother had contacted them and said, look, this is what was going on. And also I think that showed that even obviously with the disappointments my maternal grandparents must have felt in terms of what had happened to my mother, they still supported her when she was in need. And I think that's so, so important.
That makes me think of a very strong Jamaican proverb that my mother often says, and it's, if your fingers stink, you can't cut it off.
Oh.
So basically, your grandparents had something that a lot of grandparents and parents don't have, but they had that strong sense of family that, yes, okay, she's come home with this baby from a Nigerian guy that we don't know anything about, a culture we don't understand. But you know what? She's ours.
Exactly.
She's ours. And that finger's not going to get cut off. So when your mother needed them, they were right there.
Exactly.
And that's important. And obviously that's come through in how you've been able to stand up in the world. I mean, it's fascinating. I just wanted to talk a little bit more because I do, if you just give us the name again of your autobiography, because I think it's really important that everyone can go and just read a bit more and find out more about your incredible life story, because it's very inspiring.
Thank you. It's called Dreams from My Mother, and it's both a paperback and an audiobook, and I read the book.
Fabulous.
So if people like my voice, there you go.
You got a gorgeous voice. I want to ask you about your mum a little bit, Dame Elizabeth. Did you have an idea of how she expressed all of those academic credentials in her life, given that she had left Cambridge? Did she find an avenue for that part of her brain?
She certainly did. And the way that I observed it, and also my half-brothers and sisters commented to me, because I obviously didn't live with my mother for that long, but she was an avid reader, but not just a reader of English books, but Greek, Latin. And I remember my late Aunt Pat, so the sister of my mother, telling me this story about my mother had her nose in a book and she was reading, and she turned around and said to her in Greek, "Pass me the dictionary." And of course, my aunt didn't know what she was saying. Pardon, what? And so that's where she could switch off from whatever was going on. And, you know, she had a difficult life at times, but she was able to switch off and still focus on her love of languages. That was her real love. It always frustrated me, I realised growing up, that she couldn't make the best use of her brain. But she just adapted. As far as she was concerned, the most important people in her life were her children, which is really incredible, you know, because today you think, well, you can study, you could still have your children. But in those days, it was much more difficult, wasn't it?
Completely different time. Both your parents were academics. And that, the love of learning, understanding, that kind of brain power was clearly passed on to you, because you used that through your training and through the work that you did to make you the doyenne of your specialist subject.
You see, it wasn't until I was in secondary school, so I think I was about, I don't know, 13, 14, I don't know. But a teacher told me I was intelligent. I always wanted to be a nurse from, I think, around the age of 4 or 5, when I was in the children's home, and I had very bad eczema. And I used to have to go to the sick bay to have my dressings changed. And in those days, they used to use something called coal tar cream. Very, very soothing, actually. You'd have your itchy arm, you know, you always wanted to scratch, and it was painful. The nursing nun, as I realised she was eventually, would put this lovely cool tar cream on, and then put gauze on, then put bandage on, and then wrap it around. But there were other nuns that maybe would have to help out every so often, and I would have to peep round the door of sick bay and look for what I called, in my mind, the white nun. Now, they were all white, they were predominantly Irish, but this nun wore a white habit rather than the traditional black habit. And she was the only nun that I would let change my dressing. Because the other nuns, I don't think they did it deliberately. I think they weren't expert, as the nursing nun was. Because the other nuns would just tear off the bandage. The gauze had now stuck to the bandage and stuck to my skin. Tear it off, and I would bleed, and it would be painful. And I would be bawling with pain. I mean, it was so horrible. But this nun the white nun, used distraction therapy. Now, you have to remember, I was in a very religious environment. I mean, church sometimes 3 times on a Sunday. And we were taught that the nuns, wives of Christ, holy women. So when this white nun, in her white habit, what she used to use was distraction therapy, we'd call it now, because she would use what I thought were very rude words, like bottom. What? I would burst out laughing. She would take, and I wouldn't feel a thing. And, I adored that woman. Because I knew she was the person who wouldn't cause any pain. It was as simple as that. And I wanted to be like that woman, but I didn't want to be a nun. Excuse me. On the whole, my experience in the convent wasn't too bad. There were some negative things, but when I realised, fortunately, before I left the children's home, that not only was she a nun, but she was also something called a nurse. That's what I wanted to be. And why I was talking about a teacher in my secondary school telling me I was intelligent, in those days, nursing courses were run outside of the university setting, except in the odd university in Scotland. You would go to a school of nursing attached to a hospital. This teacher knew that I wanted to be a nurse. And she very gently said to me one day, without sort of looking down on nursing, she did it in a very polite way, I think. She said, "But Elizabeth, you're university material." I didn't understand what she meant. She said, "You're intelligent," she said. "You could go to university." And I thought, well, that's very nice. And I didn't say anything. I was polite enough and astute enough not to, be rude, back to something that was very polite and encouraging for me. But inwardly, I thought, I'm still going to be a nurse. Thank you very much, but no. And I stuck to my guns. But isn't it interesting, as the years go on, nursing went into academia, and you could be both a clinician and an academic at the same time. So it turned out all right in the end,
Because again, it completely speaks to the time, because if you'd have said you wanted to be a doctor, that would be, no, you need to be a nurse, because that's for girls, and the clever people who are the men will be the doctors. But what's lovely is that this teacher recognised your intelligence and felt that, because at that time, nursing was still seen as something, it's almost as if in a way, a bit like a step up from being a mother or an auntie.
Looked down upon as women's work.
It's women's work because it's caring,
not valued,
and looking after
in the way it should be, of course. Yeah.
Why did you choose to specialise in sickle cell nursing?
I call it the 3 Ps: professional, personal, political. And professional was the first factor, because I qualified as a nurse in the late 60s in London, in Paddington, in fact. I qualified as a health visitor in the early 1970s in London. As a health visitor, I worked in Brent, in Wembley, in fact. And we would call it our patch. We would have X amount of families, where in those days we focused particularly on the mother and child, the father, if you're there. But, the focus was maternal child welfare, if you like. Your role was to advise the parents about feeding, child development, sleeping, etc., etc. And one of the first families that I got involved with, there was a baby and there was a 9-year-old son. Now, initially, the focus was on the baby, as said, or infant feeding, etc., etc. As I dealt with the queries, I developed a very good relationship with this mother, who was of Caribbean origin. And I think it was a subsequent visit where the 9-year-old son was lying on the sofa. And she said to me, he's got sickle cell. He's just come out of hospital. She was very happy with his care by the paediatricians. But she said, Elizabeth, I've got so many questions I really want answers to. How can I prevent him from having so many painful crises?
Sorry to interrupt you. Could you just explain what exactly sickle cell disease is?
Certainly. Sickle cell anemia is one of the group of illnesses under the umbrella of sickle cell disease. Now, a child born with this illness has to have inherited it from both parents. Now, those parents don't necessarily have to have the illness. They're more likely to be what's called healthy silent carriers, or called sickle cell trait. And the origins of sickle cell are those parts of the world where you find a certain type of malaria. So in this country, the majority of individuals that have sickle cell disease are non-white. But there are some white people who can be affected, because the malaria that we're talking about is actually found not only in the tropical regions in parts of Africa, India, for example, but also in the Mediterranean areas, so parts of Italy, Cyprus, etc. You do get blonde-haired, blue-eyed individuals with sickle cell disease. It's rare, but you do. The vast majority in this country would be of African heritage, African Caribbean heritage. So the first 6 months, probably the baby doesn't have any symptoms at all. But then the main problems are pain, because it's called sickle cell anemia because the red blood cells, when they lose oxygen or become dehydrated, change from the donut shape that they normally are to that resembling a farmer's sickle or a banana shape. And they're rigid and sticky, and they can clot in the tiny blood vessels, causing pain, causing organ damage. So you can have the painful crises. If you know anything about the illness, it's the painful crises in the joints in various parts of the body, from very mild to excruciating, requiring, morphine and requiring hospital admission. But there are other problems, such as possible strokes, shoulder, hip problems, lung problems, because the sickling of this, if you like, it's a sort of clotting, but not quite, but a blockage, if you like. And that stops the oxygen then getting to the tissues. And wherever that's happening, either pain or, for example, there's something called hip necrosis. This is a death of tissue in the hips or the shoulders. And of course, that will then cause enormous pain, but also mobility issues. So there's a range of complications that the illness can cause. But it's a weird illness in a way, because the severity can vary both within the individual. I mean, they can be fine for quite a few years and then they have problems. Or you could have a brother and sister with the same illness, and one may not be as badly affected as the other. And the unpredictability of the illness. There are certain factors that you've got to be careful about. Change of temperature, getting cold, not drinking enough fluids, infections. But even so, you can't predict. So it's very difficult for a family to even plan a holiday, for example. Now, the positive side, when I was involved in the 70s, the life expectation was probably in 30s, 40s, but it's really improved quite significantly. So there are people in their 70s now with the condition, but they still have the issue of pain and vulnerability to chest infections, for example. And treatment hasn't really improved. There are bone marrow transplantation, if you get your right match, can actually cure the condition. So there have definitely been some improvements, but I think there's about 15 to 20,000 individuals with the condition in this country, which are actually more than cystic fibrosis, which, if you like, is, I would say, the equivalent condition, but they're both inherited in the same way. You have to have both parents pass on the faulty gene, if you like. And cystic fibrosis is more likely to be found in the majority of white Northern Europeans, but you can find it in a minority of non-white individuals. And where sickle cell disease is the reverse. The majority of affected individuals and families are non-white, but a minority are white. But they're both chronic, lifelong conditions.
I know in your book, because you were a pioneer, obviously, you had to do a lot of your own research. And I know you travelled. So which countries did you go to do that research when it came to nursing and care?
Well, the first person I need to acknowledge is now the late Dr. Misha Brozovic, who was a consultant blood specialist, a consultant haematologist in northwest London. And I had an interest in sickle cell, as I said, from the professional perspective, because I wasn't taught about this. And so then when the mother was asking me questions, I'd never had a lecture in either of my courses. I was so shocked and angry about that. But then I went to a lecture by Dr. Brozovic when I was now a community nurse tutor in Brent, and she was giving a lecture on sickle cell anemia. And the place was packed. So it wasn't that the health professionals weren't interested. Many of them weren't taught about it in their courses. And then it was so packed that she did another lecture. I went to the second lecture as well. And I was asking a lot of questions. And so afterwards she came up to me and said, you seem interested in this. And to cut a long story short, I ended up working with Dr. Brozovic. And so she taught me an awful lot to start with. And then I went to America. I'd also discovered found out that the headquarters of the Sickle Cell Foundation of America was in Los Angeles. So I just turned up without any appointment, as you do. And
you do.
As I do. And I remember there was an African-American chief exec, and she was quite tough cookie, let's be honest, And so when she first saw me, I didn't realise she just assumed that I was African-American because I had my afro, come on, this 70s.
I've seen the pictures.
Yes. And I sort of wandered in and she wasn't rude at all, but, a bit, didn't have an appointment sort of thing, but she didn't say that, but I could see from her face. And I started speaking, and the Americans love our accent. And so she sat me and said, whoa, come on, tell me about sickle cell in Britain. What's going on there? And she didn't realise she knew it was there, but she didn't realise the extent. And she was wonderful. And she said to me, look, come back next year in September. That is sickle cell month in this country.
They had a sickle cell month already in that country.
Oh, gosh, yes. Well, you see, in 1971, the pressures from the community, but also health professionals and some politicians pushed this issue so much that Nixon authorised Sickle Cell Control Act, passed the Sickle Cell Control Act, it was called, which released funds to develop what were called sickle cell comprehensive centres. There were about 10 of them around the United States. While I was at there, that's when I realised that nurses were also part of what they called the multidisciplinary team for sickle cell. So these were sickle cell nurse practitioners, and they were predominantly African-American. All I can say is it was the United States, the generosity, the humour, the intellects of all these individuals that I met that really enabled me to come back and say to Dr. Brozovic, listen, nurses are involved. There are sickle cell nurses. So Dr. Brozovic found the funding for me to become the first sickle cell nurse, working with her. That's how it all happened.
Amazing.
And we go then, so that's professional. Personal was, then I found my father. I then find out I have a cousin with sickle cell anemia. Well, that brings it home to you, doesn't it, in the family?
It certainly does.
And then political. Wow, I was a political animal in the 70s. Come on.
Because you thought about going into politics, is that right?
I did.
At one stage.
Oh, yes, you know.
I've done my research.
You certainly have. I joined the Labour Party it was early 70s. And there were some very good people in it who but I really got disillusioned because I was living in Ealing and there was this dreadful murder of a young Sikh boy in Southall. Awful. And I just didn't feel that this issue was taken up adequately. They weren't anti. I felt there must be more energy in respect to racism in our lives that had led to the death of this young boy, I got disillusioned and I left the party as a result of that. And I realised also I was probably, what do they call it, when you're interested more in an issue rather than a general,
ideology.
So health was important to me, and then sickle, obviously. So I got more involved with campaigning with people on particular issues rather than being part of this sort of large organisation. So I never lost my ideals, I don't think, but I didn't feel comfortable and I was angry. I really was angry. And I wanted to invest my energy created by that anger in working with like-minded people.
Yeah. So, as you say, that energy propelled you.
Definitely.
And caused you to create what you did and become...
Yes, I often say to people, don't worry about anger, channel your positive energy.
Loving the subject of the anger. How much of that anger did you channel into getting the Mary Seacole statue erected?
Huge amount, Suzanne. Because there was this tiny minority of people, not just in this country, but who were saying, oh, Mary Seacole, she wasn't even a nurse. And I was saying, excuse me, you don't know your history of nursing profession, because there was no regulation of nursing until the first act in this country was 1919. And we're talking about the Crimean War in the 1850s. Excuse me? I mean, Florence Nightingale, and I was also saying, why are you causing a fight, artificial fight between Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole. Come on.
And it did arouse that, didn't it?
Oh, of course it did. Of course it did, Women, race. Oh, come on. They had the whole lot there if they wanted to, and some of them did use it. Fortunately, like-minded people won the argument of the day.
We hope you're enjoying our conversation with Dame Elizabeth Anionwu.
Dame Elizabeth made a contribution to the book we wrote in response to the murder of George Floyd. Still Breathing, 100 Black Voices on Racism.
The book features 100 essays from musicians, members of parliament, poets, artists, athletes, civil servants, doctors, and lawyers. They seek to educate, to bear witness, and to offer hope for a better future.
You can find Still Breathing, 100 Black Voices at all good online retailers.
Elizabeth, I don't know if I've ever said this to you. You've got this real, it's a soft power energy. And I'll tell you where I'll give an example of this is when I just knew you, obviously, because I was working with Azuka on Casualty, and you just came one day and, oh, what a wonderful woman. Oh, and then you started talking about the Mary Seacole statue. And then next thing I knew, I was speaking at the consecration of the site outside on the grounds of St. Thomas's Hospital, and not realising that this was such a massive event and you were such a big part of it. And then I thought, oh my goodness, this woman is a big wig. I mean, but you so casually said, would you like to speak? And it was that day I thought, you are a phenomenal, your leadership qualities are so strong, but in a very relaxed way. I wonder where you learned that. How did that come about?
Because you see, I never went through classical nursing career. And I think because I was able to be part of groups of people who were innovators. And I probably realised if you were at the beginning of something, you do what you like. Because nobody really knows what the heck you're on about. They really don't. And okay, there might be some opposition, but always there are people who, it's a good idea. It's the only way we can help. Not just me, but, with others. So I never went on a management course. I honestly didn't see myself as a leader. I think what it was I was very observant. So when I was at meetings, I would notice how certain people achieved their aims at the meeting. And I'm thinking, oh, that's how they do it. That's how they do it. Because I'd put my foot in it previously at certain situations. I thought, well, I didn't do that well. I got blocked here. Or actually, I was wrong in the way I was approaching this. I was rude. I did speak too long. You're just watching. You're learning. And you're listening to your feedback as well, of course. Somebody is saying, actually, Elizabeth, you didn't do that very well, or I didn't appreciate what you did then. Goodness me, did I learn from my mistakes?
As you're speaking, what kept coming back to my mind was that little girl in that home who observed who was the nurse, who was the nun, because you didn't know she was a nurse, who was the nun she needed to go to.
That's true, yeah.
And I think your point when you said about observation, I think it's so, so important because you learn something. You learn, like another saying, you get more flies with honey than vinegar.
Oh, okay.
And
I like that.
It feels to me that you're somebody who has that, even just speaking to you, how you have that, you have power and you have a lot of integrity and a lot of personal control and power. Even you see that when you come into a room, but you don't assert it in a way that is to put anybody down. You're bringing people in. And I think it's, when you mentioned soft power, Sue, I thought, yes, I see that. But you know what you need to do and you're doing it and you're finding the most efficient way to do it, but also the way that is going to, as you said, get results.
It's such an innate sense of right and wrong. That seems to have driven you throughout your career. I have a question relating to your book, Dame Elizabeth. As you were writing it, what did you learn about yourself? Were there any self-discoveries?
Well, I think I really saw the role of what I think people are calling mentors or role models, and how much I was able to learn from literature. because obviously I didn't have the resources, neither did my family or the children's home to travel or, and also I didn't grow up in a stable, traditional family where you would learn, hopefully, values and have your role models. I mean, I had my mother, obviously. The books that I was reading would be about a normal family. And I realised, well, that was like my dream, to be in, because obviously I realised the children's home wasn't like the family I was reading about. And reading helped me enormously. I mean, obviously I must have got that from my mother in a way, because I really loved reading. When I was writing my memoirs, having read so many memoirs of others, I'm very nosy. I'm so nosy about other people's lives. But some autobiographies, you think, I wonder if other people think of you like that. You're thinking a bit, I don't know. When you know a little bit more about the person's life, but it's not demonstrated in their autobiography, you think, really? And I thought, how do I try and avoid that? I mean, we will always slip into that, whether we like it or not. So what I decided was to ask, I'm trying to think how many people I interviewed. I interviewed about 30-odd people from different parts of my life, family, careers, and asked them to do an interview with me. I tape recorded these interviews. And I said, look, warts and all, come on, don't put me up here. And also, because I've got a dreadful memory, it gave me a sort of timeline, and they would tell me things that I had totally forgotten about. One person said to me, you can be very impatient. You assume that people sometimes are with you, are caught up with you, and they haven't. And it's obvious. I've been in a meeting or a discussion, and you're just going off on one, and she's not in an angry way, but you're flying, with your thoughts, and somebody's struggling to keep up with you, and it's like you're not aware that they actually haven't caught up with you, and you're like, whoops. And because you don't know it, that's a weakness on your part, because you're not, although I am observant, I'm not always observant. I can sometimes get caught up and not realise that some people are not actually keeping up with me. And it's not a matter that they're not keeping up with you. It's you, Elizabeth. You're going too fast. You just need to slow down a bit.
And
I thought that was quite interesting, because I'm okay. But that was what I needed to know.
Yeah, but I think it's wonderful that you actually spoke to people before you put pen to paper. And I don't know how many people do that, because you read things and there's something there. Sometimes there's a lack of honesty.
Yeah.
And there is a fear, because we all want to be remembered in the best possible light. But if you're going to be honest about your life and you want there to be some honesty, I think you have to look at all those sides. And it is the other perspectives that are going to show you actually in the end in the best possible light.
Was it a massive surprise when you presented the Pride of Britain Award by Janet Jackson?
Oh, yes, you can see it.
How was that?
Well, somebody sent me the YouTube clip that you can still see. You can see so as you know, there's Pride of Britain. First of all, so it was in a big hotel, and Carol Vorderman was the host. And mine was the Lifetime Achievement, so it was the last award of the evening. Now, in this, I went with my daughter, my granddaughter, and some friends. I was able to take a fair number of guests. We had never seen so many celebrities in our life. Football, politics, entertainment. So all the people that went before me to get their awards, a lot of children get awards, it's lovely. So we were all thinking, I wonder who's going to present your award, Elizabeth? We were just looking around and thinking, well, I wonder if it's the former health minister over there, or I don't know. So I went up, and I was in my African Nigerian outfit, my gele and all this. And I was nervous. We've seen the film, I've come up, and to present your award, and I'm thinking, now, who is it, Miss Janet Jackson. What? She wasn't in the audience.
What?
That's what, no way we would have.
She came from backstage.
What a fabulous moment. This has been fabulous. Talking to you has been really, really gorgeous and so informative. I again urge people to get your autobiography.
Thank you.
As well as our book,
Yes.
Still Breathing, 100 Black Voices on Racism, 100 Ways to Make a Change. And you speak in there as well. Now, The show is called Veranda Talks. You've been here talking to us, and we'd like you to tell us about your veranda, how you imagine your veranda, where it is, what you can see, maybe what the smells are, what you're drinking, everything. Just close your eyes for a moment and just imagine this place, your veranda.
I don't actually have to imagine. I'm switching my veranda for my little balcony attached to my flat. I'm on the 4th floor. And I've always liked going out there, and I'm in a small group of flats, just 3 blocks of flats. But you can see the main road and you can see people passing. And when it was most important to me and when I felt as though I was on a veranda was during the COVID pandemic. I was now over 70 when the pandemic broke. And I don't know whether you remember, but the first people who had to go into lockdown were people over the age of 70. So we had to go into lockdown a week before everybody else. That's the first time I got quite anxious and frightened about this pandemic. And the idea that we have to go into lockdown before everybody else, that shows you're seen as a vulnerable group in society, which I'd never really seen myself. And my veranda, my balcony, which was my veranda looking out onto this world that I now felt excluded from for health reasons, for good reasons, was my refuge. And I still see that when you kindly invited me to take part in this and saw this term veranda. I know in the tropics, I love the verandas, but my veranda is my balcony. And it's where in the morning the sun comes down, I can sit, and I don't drink alcohol, but I like my fruit juice. I'm just so nosy, I think I've told you. So I can watch people, they can't see me watching them. It's great. So the world goes by. But, when my daughter was small and when my granddaughter was small, take them out onto the balcony, play with them. It's safe, so they can lean and look over and you're not worried, You're at a height. So obviously veranda, normally you'd be at ground level, I suppose. But I can take my deck chair out there and just sit and put my feet up. And it's quite a small veranda, stroke balcony. It's got a ledge, so I can put my drink, I can put my book or my radio or whatever music, because music's so important to me. So I can relax. Only space for 1 or more people. But I think it's more, I can feel relaxed and I can feel at peace with myself and I can entertain myself in a way. But also I can watch the world.
And still observe.
By. Absolutely, yeah. And see people doing things they don't even know anybody can see that they're doing. So my sense of humour comes in then. Do you realise actually I can watch what you're up to down there? Yes, so that's my veranda, I think. Yes.
Sounds
Perfect.
idyllic. That is
Your
gorgeous.
refuge.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
a great word,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Dame Elizabeth Anionwu, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you on our veranda.
Thank you so much for inviting
Thank
me.
you.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's been
Thank
lovely.
you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dame Elizabeth Anionwu.
If you did, why not click, share, and send it to someone you think would enjoy it too? Or they're able to find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
I'm Suzette Llewellyn.
And I'm Suzanne Packer.
Veranda Talk is a Bengo Media production.